My dear friends, today I'm going to speak on the Environmental Impact Assessment EIA Draft Notification 2020. Before I begin, I would like to thank and appreciate the many environmental activists who have relentlessly kept the battle to save our environment going. My own experience in this warfare has served to enlighten me to better understand the way our governments work. My deep appreciation goes to our own Goa Foundation, led by Claude Alvarez, and also the prominent environment lawyer Ritvik Datta, as well as others like Vikrant Tongad, Jay Mazumdar, etc., whose writings have also helped me make this video possible. As the name suggests, an EIA is supposed to consider the environmental impact of projects and find ways to reduce their adverse impacts upon the environment. An EIA also involves the people concerned in the decision-making process of granting final approval to any developmental project or activity. In India, we are known to act only after disaster has struck. After the Bhopal gas disaster in 1982, the Indian government enacted the Environment Protection Act of 1986. And then came the Environment Impact Assessment Notification of 1994, and then the EIA 2006. The latest proposed change has now come in the draft of EIA 2020 notification, which we are supposed to study and forward our comments to the Modi ji ministry by the 11th of August. To begin with, the ministry proposes that any new project to come or any project already existing and needing expansion must be made to go through a prior environment clearance or a prior environment permission requirement. In the process of obtaining environmental clearance, public consultation or public hearing is listed as a required procedure. But we soon find that for many cases there are exemptions from this rule for some projects, which have been exempted from public hearings, and some are even exempt from environmental clearances. In the draft notification 2020, we find that not less than 40 kinds of projects have been exempted from having to obtain the clearance, which also means that for these there will be no public scrutiny, no public hearing as well. Some of these are, for example, All India Waterways Project and expansion or widening of national highways. This will thus include roads that cut through forests and would also include the dredging of major rivers. Maintenance dredging has been exempted from requiring prior clearance, but wouldn't removing large parts of riverbeds to maintain the depth at terminals or create new shipping channels have a significant impact on the marine ecosystem and long-term survival of Indian rivers? So also, sand or clay extraction projects for certain groups of people, community use projects such as digging of wells, etc., have been freed from having to obtain the environmental clearance. Similarly, under Section 26, subsection 14, solar photovoltaic power projects, solar thermal power plants, and solar parks are also exempted, despite well-known environmental impacts, including diversion of agricultural land, demand on subsoil water, etc. Exemption is also given to coal and non-coal mineral prospecting, which can cause considerable ecological damage quite apart from the larger extraction projects that may follow. In Tamil Nadu, for example, not so long ago, there was a strong protest from farmers when state permission was granted to a company to prospect for oil in the fertile delta region in Thanjavur. The 2020 draft also exempts most building construction projects of built-up area of 20,000 square meters up to 1,50,000 square meters. Imagine a building construct project almost as large as an airport not having to go through the process of prior environmental impact assessment clearance. These can be passed without any public hearing. This will largely help the building and construction lobby, which had been bound by endless litigation owing to environmental clearance rules. A special mention needs to be made as regards widening of roads. There already exists a disturbing Environment Ministry notification of 2013 exempting highway development projects involving widening of roads which are up to 100 kilometers in length. Widening of such roadways to a width of between 40 meters and up to 60 meters can be carried out in the cases where there are bypasses or realignments. So what looked like a more stringent notification would hardly seem to be actually so. Further, subsection 7 of section 5 states that if a certain project is considered to be strategic by the ministry, it would have to obtain environmental clearance, but it will not be placed in the public domain. In other words, any project which the ministry declares to be strategic is not to undergo any public consultation or public hearing. While some might consider it acceptable to label defense and security projects as strategic and therefore to be kept out of public scrutiny, there is nothing to prevent the government from declaring someday some other project as well to be of strategic importance and also to be kept out of public hearing. Take for example the coal project or the mining project. What if the government were to someday decide that such projects are strategic projects? Then the double tracking in Goa for transportation of coal or even for mining products would not have to come under any public consultation or public hearing, or any other project for that matter. The ministry would be free to declare any project as strategic simply to remove it out of public scrutiny and hearing. How effective are we in the implementation of the EIA notifications? Oh, Goa is fantastic in the implementation of the very opposite of the CIA clearance, and so are the central government officials. Only recently, the state government of Goa was caught blatantly engaging in fraud. It submitted a false report to obtain clearance for an airport near the ecologically sensitive Mopa Plateau, endangering not only flora and fauna, but also marauding the livelihood of hundreds of farmers. Even after this, neither the government officers nor the EIA consultants who gave false information to secure the clearance were reprimanded. Instead, the expert appraisal committee of the central ministry revisited the project and issued a clearance. The 2020 notification seeks to dilute the process of public consultation and of public hearing. For example, in the case of public consultation, it reduces the period for the public to give its response to 20 days only. The previous 2006 notification had required not less than 30 days to be given to the public to give in its responses. Next, the 2020 notification also states that the public hearing shall be conducted within 40 days of receipt of request letter from the project proponent. In the earlier 2006 notification, this time period was 45 days, and the public hearing was to be conducted at the site or in close proximity to the site. No such clause is given in the draft EIA notification 2020. So, cutting down the time for public preparation, it is as if the ministry does not want any adverse criticism of project proposals. The EIA process must be transparent and credible. If reduced time is given, gathering of information can be a problem, and the exercise would be meaningless. If the stakeholders are deprived of time for a proper study, it would indeed be a violation of the principles of natural justice. There are a number of projects that are exempted from the public hearing process, but I would just dwell on one of these, just to shorten my talk. There are many other things to discuss, but I am going to touch just a few of the topics right now. Here, in the case of existing projects that may merely be looking to expand, the notification denies any need for a public consultation if the modernization is less than 50% of the project capacity. But this could easily induce the project proponent who wants to go in for expansion to deliberately plan the process in a piecemeal manner so as to circumvent the law and thus avoid any public hearing. Another observation to be made regarding public hearing is that projects within national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, coral reefs, or ecologically sensitive areas will be subject to public consultation only within that specific district, regardless of the fact that the ecological impacts of the project, such as roads to and from mining areas or other infrastructure, may extend beyond that district and spill over to contiguous and neighboring areas. Almost a year ago, a fire broke out at the Bagajan oil field in Assam, operated by the state-owned Oil India Limited. The massive blaze that occurred this time could be seen miles away with thick black smoke billowing out from one of its wells. 2 firefighters died and thousands of people had to be shifted to a relief camp. The major area of concern was that this oil field was located close to the Dibru-Saikova National Park, rich in biodiversity and home to 36 species of mammals and 400 species of birds. There were carcasses of marine animals that were discovered, including those of the critically endangered Gangetic dolphins. The oil field in Assam had failed to conduct public hearings as part of the EIA clearances for the project. Now we come to the section that deals with violations. The Draft Environment Notification 2020 requires that all projects requiring prior environmental clearances ought to begin construction only after obtaining the clearance. But what if an unscrupulous developer, without possessing the mandatory clearance, begins to put up his project? He damages the earth and might even begin operations. What then? This is done in blatant violation of the law. What does the new notification have to say on this? Who is to report violations and what is the punishment? If you were to notice any project coming up suddenly and you suspect it does not have environmental clearance, even if it be a massive project, can you register a complaint with the government authority? Not at all. The new proposed notification states that cognizance of the violation shall be made on A, suo motu application of the project proponent, or B, reporting by any government authority, etc., etc. So you see, the government is supposed to act only if the developer, who is at fault himself, comes to the office and confesses that he has broken the law. The other person who can put forth a complaint is the government authority. That's all. Complaints can be registered only by these two persons. There is no scope for any member of the public to report the case of violations. It was not so under the old laws. Then, if it is discovered that the operations at a plant are proceeding in violations of the law, what will be the punishment? Of course, you'd say jail and immediate close down. Come on, man, this guy who has pillaged the earth, polluted it, put up his constructions, might even have begun operations. All this without going through the procedure of obtaining environmental clearance in the first place. What does the notification 2020 say about such cases? Believe me, the answer may surprise you, if not shock you. As per the notification, the defaulting developer is given a chance to get his project regularized, provided he pays a fine. This is called post facto clearance. According to the notification, the appraisal committee will assess if the project has been constructed at the permissible site and if it can be made to run sustainably if it complies with the environmental norms and with adequate safeguards. If so, the committee would ask the company to stop its operations for now, pay the fine, apply for environmental clearance, and upon obtaining it, to resume operations. He would also have to submit a bank receipt of a 5-year term as part of the remediation process. And what is the fine imposed? Subsection 8 of Section 22 states that the fine will be less if he had to have complained about it himself. And that will be $1,000, 1,000 rupees to 5,000 rupees a day, depending on what category the project falls. Subsection 9 states that if cognizance of violation is by any government authority, the fine could be 2,000 to 10,000 rupees a day. So what do we have here? It looks as if we have a pillage and pay rule. If you've got some money stored up, you don't have to worry about obtaining the prior environmental clearance. But then to this, we have to ask, can money make up for the environmental and other damage done? A point to note is, can the governmental authority, such as the appraisal committee or the technical expert company, conduct a surprise visit to the project site for ascertaining whether there is any environmental or ecological damage, or to check or scrutinize the operational process? No, definitely not. The notification demands that a minimum notice of 7 days at least be given to the project developer of the intended visit by the government authority. Let me say, on the 7th of May 2020, you might have heard about it. A gas leak at the LG polymers plant was responsible for killing 12 people, and 1,000 others had to be evacuated from their homes. It was found out that the company had been operating without a valid prior environmental clearance since 2017. Next, projects which have been set up with the prior environmental clearance have to put in what is known as a compliance report every year. This is to ensure that the project is abiding by the requirements of the environmental clearance. In the earlier notification of 2006, the compliance report was to be submitted every 6 months. There was a special reason for this, and this was done so as to arrest any harm being done to the environment due to a faulty system in place. Every 6 months, the developer was required to file a compliance report. But now this too is being changed. The new law states that the compliance report has to be filed only once a year, which means that if there is some faulty process going on in the project which is causing some damage, the same could go on for a full year without any need to arrest or report it. This gives enough scope to hide or underreport the environmental and social consequences of a project. Not only that, the new notification also gives the project proponent further time to go on with the damage. The new law is almost like the law on violations seen above. Who has to complain of the failure to submit the compliance report to the government? Again, it's the developer himself, or if not him, the government authority. The expert appraisal committee has the right to book him for this failure. According to subsection 5 of section 23 of the notification, the expert committee or appraisal shall deliberate on the non-compliance and invite the project proponent to clarify the matter. Mind you, invite. Hello, my friend, you have broken the law. Come, let's have tea and discuss matters. The committee shall then make a categorical recommendation for a time-bound action plan for compliance of the conditions imposed by the environmental clearance and ask for an amount by way of bank guarantee which will be released after successful implementation of the action plan. The fine for non-compliance varies from 500 rupees a day to 2,500 rupees per day depending on the category of the project. So once the developer gets his operations going, he may not declare his compliance with the EIA norms for at least a year. In case of malfunction or technical flaw developing, he need not report it, but continue as long as this is not found out. Meanwhile, any danger or destruction could go on unnoticed. I want to bring to tell you something about that Reliance power plant in Madhya Pradesh. Recently, a dike broke there, spilling ashes over hundreds of acres of cropland, polluting the river and killing many individuals, including children. This is the third time such an incident has occurred in a year. Also, a similar breach at an SR power plant resulted in 500 farmers losing their crops. Their cries of protest were cowed down by paramilitary forces who coerced them to shut their mouths. Planning to erect such a dam in a seismically active zone is a disastrous and irresponsible decision on the part of the government anyway. But what about now? Now, hydroelectric power plants are proposed to be exempted from public hearings altogether. Next, the compliance mechanism requires the promoters to file the documents on which the environment impact is to be assessed. This leaves a lot of room for promoters to pick and choose the data and information which is to be supplied. Arguably, if a proponent is engaged in developmental activity, he has the scope of either hiding data about the detrimental consequences of the activity or downplaying its impact. This can be seen, for example, from Sterlite Industries. You know, Sterlite is a subsidiary of Vedanta, which constructed its refinery project without even disclosing the mining business at the first stage. In the Vedanta case of the Niyamgiri forest, legal provisions were violated and bent for the corporation's benefit, ignoring the plight of the Adivasi population. If the government relies only on information provided by the developer, by the project proponent, this would mean that unless someone complains about a problematic aspect, the problem will go unnoticed. Now let us consider something else. Once a developer has obtained environmental clearance, how long is it valid for? What are the terms of its validity? For most of the projects, the validity term is 10 years. For river valley or irrigation projects, it is 15 years. But for mining projects, the validity period is 50 years. In the earlier 2006 notification, the validity was only 30 years. So mining projects have been given much more leeway. Now I'll take you to an aside. In Goa, there is a project for laying of a 400 kV transmission power line passing through the Mahavir Wildlife Sanctuary by the Goa government. Does this project truly serve a public purpose, or is there a sinister design of something else? Information obtained from the Ministry of Railways shows that there is an intent for not only doubling of tracks, but also for the electrification of the route. Note that Hubli-Londa-Vasco da Gama is included into this planning. So also is Hubli-Gadag Hospital. The line will run from Dharwad in Karnataka to Goa and will affect almost 50 hectares of forest area and result in felling of another 16,000 and odd trees. Why has the truth of this project not been brought out into the public domain? Why has there been no public hearing on this? The doubled Hospet-Tinaigat Vasco line will pass through Goa's Bhagawan Mahavir Sanctuary as well as Karnataka's Dandeli Sanctuary. It is not impossible to guess for whose benefit this 400 kV transmission line is being laid and who qualifies to be the main beneficiaries of this power line. The way the draft EIA notification has been written leaves very little scope for public involvement. The various committees formed are under the control of the central ministry, and even the members of the state level committees responsible for project approvals and appraisals are appointed and can be dismissed by the ministry. The draft notification does away with the requirements of committees to be set up in consultation with state governments and gives the central government more control over the constitution of state level regulatory authorities and expert committees. The ministry thus is able to directly manage their functions. The ACO, that is the Assessment Consultant Organization, is drawn from institutes and there are no individual members from the public in its team. It would have been better and more credible if the ACO would have consisted also of individual members of repute. Without this, the political and bureaucratic stronghold by the ministry is complete. Finally, to conclude, upon study of the draft notification 2020, it is clear that this draft seeks the promotion of commercial projects at the cost of the environment. The scope of public consultation is limited. Post facto approvals are allowed. By relying heavily on the supposed honest, self-implicating developer, the ministry would only be playing into the hands of the dishonest, vicious entrepreneurs and industrialists, resulting in the destruction of not only our environment but also of our sensibilities. Though the lockdown period is on, the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change has been in a rush to clear projects. Is the draft EIA notification 2020 a part of that same pattern of behavior? We have to ask. An EIA is considered an important tool to achieve sustainability. The Supreme Court has observed in the Vellore Citizens Welfare Forum versus Union of India case that companies, of course, are vital for the country's development. But having regard to pollution, the doctrine of sustainable development must be adopted by them as a balancing concept. If final clearance is granted after taking into account the environmental, social, health concerns, then it can be said that the government is using this process as a tool to ensure sustainability. But if we look at several aspects of the new draft notification, friends, it seems that the government is compromising on the process, thus promoting development without taking into account other concerns. The activists would warn the public that the current notification, if it should come into force, is a move towards seeking investment irrespective of an adverse consequences that could follow. The government should not allow investment by diluting the EIA process just to fulfill its ambitious project of making India a $5 trillion economy by 2024. The draft EIA notification 2020 in its present form must be scrapped and replaced with one that is in keeping with the spirit and letter of the Environment Protection Act 1986. Thank you.